Hi guys, I'm here to read another chapter from our story. We're getting to the end, which is crazy. I'll have to pull out another book this week probably. So, this next chapter. So, look at the last chapter. He had put the potion in the soup, and all the witches were eating the soup. He got his tail a little bit chopped off, but his grandmama is going to fix it. So now we're waiting to see what happens next. Mr. Jenkins and his son. Mr. Jenkins came standing up at our table with a very purposeful look on his face. "Where's that grandson of yours?" he said to my grandmother. He spoke rudely and looked very angry. My grandmother put on her frostiest look, but excuse me, but didn't answer him. "My guess is that he and my son Bruno are up to something devilment," Mr. Jenkins went on. "Bruno hasn't turned up for his supper, and it takes a lot to make the boy miss his food." "I must admit he has very healthy appetite," my grandmother said. "My feeling is that you're in on this as well," Mr. Jenkins said. "I don't know who the devil you are, and I don't much care, but you played a nasty trick on me and my wife this afternoon. You put a dirty little mouse on the table. That makes me think all of three of you are up to something. So if you know where Bruno's hiding, kindly tell me at once." "There's no trick I played on you," my grandmother said. "That mouse I tried to give you was your little boy, Bruno. I was being kind to you. I was trying to restore him to the bosom of his family, but you refused to take him in." "What in the blazes do you mean, madam?" shouted Mr. Jenkins. "My son isn't a mouse." His black mustache jumped up and down like crazy as he spoke. "Come on, woman. Where is he? Out with it." The family at the table nearest to us had all stopped eating and were staring at Mr. Jenkins. My grandmother sat there puffing away calmly at her black cigar. I can well understand your anger, Mr. Jenkins," she said, "and any other English father would be just as cross as you are. But over in Norway, where I come from, we are quite used to these sort of happenings. We have learned to accept them as part of everyday life." "You must be mad, woman," cried Mr. Jenkins. "Where is Bruno? If you don't tell me at once, I shall summon the police." "Bruno is a mouse," my grandmother said calmly as ever. "He most certainly is not a mouse," shouted Mr. Jenkins. "Oh, yes, I am," Bruno said, poking his head up out of the handbag. Mr. Jenkins leapt about 3 feet into the air. "Hello, Dad," Bruno said. He had a silly sort of mousy grin on his face. Mr. Jenkins' mouth dropped up on one side so wide I could see the gold fillings in the back teeth. "Don't worry, Dad," Bruno went on. It's not as bad as all that, miss. Just so long as the cat doesn't get me." "Bruno," stammered Mr. Jenkins. "No more school," shouted Bruno said, grinning with a broad and asinine mouse grin. "No more homework. I shall live in the kitchen cupboard and feast on raisins and honey." But Bruno," stammered Mr. Jenkins. Again, how did this happen? The poor man had no wind left in his sails at all. "Witches," my grandmother said. "The witches did it." "I have a mouse for a son," shrieked Mr. Jenkins. So here is the dad finding out his son is a mouse. "You got one," my grandmother said. "Be nice to him, Mr. Jenkins." "Mrs. Jenkins will go crazy," yelled Mr. Jenkins. "She can't stand the thing." "She'll just have to get used to him," my grandmother said. "I hope you don't keep a cat in the house." We do, cried Mr. Jenkins. "Topsy is my wife's favorite creature." "Then you'll have to get rid of Topsy," my grandmother said. "Your son is more important than your cat." "He certainly is," Bruno shouted from inside the handbag. "You Tomas got to get rid of that Topsy before I go home." By now, half of the dining room was watching our little group. Knives and forks and spoons had been put down, and all the places heads were turning round to stare at Mr. Jenkins as he stood there spluttering and shouting. They couldn't see either Bruno or me. They were wondering what all the fuss was about. By the way, my grandmother said, would you like to know who did this to him? There is a mischievous little smile on her face, and I could see that she was about to get Mr. Jenkins into trouble. Who? He cried. Who did it? The woman over there, my grandmother said, the small one in the black dress at the head of the long table. She's RSPCC, cried Mr. Jenkins. She's a chairwoman. No, she's not, my grandmother said. She's a grand high witch of all the world. You mean she did it? That skinny little woman over there, shouted Mr. Jenkins, pointing at her with a long finger. By gad, I have my lawyers on her for this. I'll have her pay through the nose. I wouldn't do anything rash, my grandmother said. The woman has magic powers. She might decide to turn you into something even sillier than a mouse. A cockroach, perhaps? Turn me into a cockroach, shouted Mr. Jenkins, puffing out his chest. I'd like to see her try. He swung around and started marching across the dining room toward the high witch's table. My grandmother and I watched him. Bruno had jumped up on a table and was also watching his father. Practically everyone in the dining room was watching Mr. Jenkins now. I stayed where I was, peeping out in the grandmother's handbag. I thought it might be wise to stay there. So, tomorrow we'll read The Triumph. I hope you all have a good day, and I'll talk to you later. Mwah!